Okay. All right. Um, Today we're going to, as I said last session, we're going to cover speaking, teaching, listening, and I'm going to do that by modeling teaching, listening. All right.
All right.
All right. So let me just pull this up. There's a major update for Windows, and I should have waited till tonight to do the update. And now it has everything switched around. I hope they didn't get rid of the screensavers. They were pretty cool.
What screens?
That's my question.
Now, Windows have those where they show different landmarks and animals.
Oh yeah,
As
yeah. In the beginning, yeah.
Pretty neat. All right. So let's all right. So I want to start off by, why is it doing that? I want to start off by asking you, have you ever acted as if you were someone or something you were not?
Yeah, absolutely. We do it all the time. Role plays and training.
But I'm talking about something, not a role play. I'm talking about it, in a situation where no one knew you were role playing, that you were trying to disguise yourself.
No, I can't. I can't recall such an incident.
All right, I had a feeling you're an upright man, and I knew you wouldn't do that. So my next question would be: do you know someone who pretended to be someone or something they were not? Whether you know directly or indirectly or historical figure?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you explain the situation?
Basically, this person was in a social setting where he didn't want to be known. He didn't want anybody to know who he was. And he just made up a story about himself. Of course, the people he was with are not people that he knows or is even interested that much in knowing them. And it was, from his perspective, is more of a security issue than anything else.
So you would agree that some people can pretend or even lie or hide their identity for justifiable reasons, for righteous reasons.
Yeah, yeah.
Would you also agree that people hide that identity for nefarious reasons?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Are there any other reasons why someone would pretend to be someone they were not?
I'm sure there are. For example, you have investigators can hide their identity to penetrate a gang or something, right? They're doing it for reasons that they believe are right, and they're trying to find information, spies, etc. There's lots of different people. It's not just insecurity; it can also be other reasons.
Right. And People could do it to scam or to scam you, to steal from you, to create chaos, right? Sabotage, espionage.
Yeah.
Um, if we look at a book title, you saw a book, and the book was titled "A Chosen Exile." What would you think that, without reading the book, what would you think that title? What would you think that book would be about? What does that title imply?
It implies that somebody had to exile themselves, or they had to leave, or left their reality, accepted a different reality. It doesn't have to be physical. It can be also a mental thing. It could be a journey. It could be an emotion. It can be a number of things. But that's, yeah, it's basically some form of separation. That's what I would see it in.
So the book would be about some type of somebody choosing to separate for something.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's what we're going to listen. We're going to listen to a interview about African American passing. All right. Which we can.
What is meant by passing?
Well, we're going to talk about that.
Okay.
So I'll let you put the context clues together based on the warmer question and the title, "A Chosen Exile." What type of ideas and topics might be covered in this interview?
It seems to be, because it's a story about an African American. And then, it's understandable. Maybe this person, due to the struggle of the African American in general, and based on that historical fact of what brought Africans to America, it could be one of two things. And I mean, when you say chosen exile, it's going to be about somehow breaking off a society or leaving somewhere to get some form of peace of mind, something like that.
Peace of mind.
Get away
So
from a situation that may not be.
So moving away from a situation, you said peace of mind.
Yeah.
Some other ideas and topics. You said based on, I guess you're implying based on slavery, right? Based on the Middle Passage slavery. Yeah. Getting away from slavery, or getting away from what else? What would you think?
Getting away from racism, getting away from inequality, getting away from the lack of civil rights, getting away from assumptions, presumptions, not being able to express yourself or be yourself, or being put in a situation where you have to act in a certain way or be a certain way, and having your history told to you the way they want you to know about it, or the way it's been written to you. There's a lot of things that can be there.
There you go. Yeah, so I think you hit on some good topics. So let's look at our keywords and context. So you're going to hear these words in the interview. The first word you're going to hear is the word passing. And you asked me what did I mean by passing? And passing is basically everything that you just said. You kind of defined it already. Passing is when a person or a group of people, in this case, we're talking about a group of people, they're trying to get away, as you said. They're trying to, as you said, they're trying to look for freedom, try to escape racism. In this case, passing, let me say it this way, then I'll let you answer. Do you think I could pass? If this was 1910 Jim Crow America, could Ray Roberts pass?
You could, but it'd be very difficult. It'd be very
In
difficult.
which way? In which ways could I pass?
You'd have to get, because from what you're saying, passing, meaning you want to get to a place where we have that, where we escape all of that, where we escape all of the issues of 1910 Jim Crow. To do that, you'd have to be like those Haitians who moved out of the U.S. and went on to a different island. Even then, they couldn't get away from a lot of what slavery had done to them, but it had at least giving them a place where maybe they can start to rebuild or start to re-identify themselves. But I don't think you can
So,
get away from it.
so okay. So let's narrow the context. Passing in this case, meaning you have to pass within the box. You can't leave the box to pass. So you have to stay inside of 1910 Jim Crow America. You can't leave it. So you can't go to France. You can't go to Canada. You have to stay in deep South Louisiana. You have to stay even in the segregation of northern of the northern, the northern states above this Mason-Dixon line. So you can't leave the country. So I'll ask you again, could I pass?
No, you, Ray, would not pass.
Why?
Because you appear to be, because it's all about appearances. It has nothing to do with what you are inside.
Right.
And because that's how people are judged at that time, by what you look like. They don't care what's inside of you. They don't care. There is no identity inside of you. As far as they're concerned, even whatever you have inside of you is not what they want to hear, what they want to see. So
Right.
everything is based on the external. So
Right.
externally, you are African American. You're black. So there is just no way for you to pass.
No passing. No, I couldn't pass if I tried to pass. There's no way I could pass.
Nope.
Right? No way.
No way.
There's no way I could pass at all. So, and we're gonna talk about that in a second. To kind of wrap up this idea of passing. Imitation. Imitation in this case refers to actually a movie that the interview will talk about, which deals with passing. So in this case, imitation is pretending or imitating to be what? What would the person be imitating?
Pretending to be Caucasian, be white.
Pretending to be white. So which leads us to our next word. We already said that I cannot pass, but those people who are light-skinned or fair-skinned could pass.
Mhm.
Right? All right. So interesting enough, my great-grandmother could pass. When I used to go over her house and I was still young, I used to tell my mother, and I would tell my mother, I don't want to go over that white woman's house. Because to me, she was white. She looked like a white woman, right? And she didn't sound black. She didn't speak black. I thought she was white. I thought I was going over this white woman's house. I don't want to go over this white woman's house, but she could pass, and she was old enough where she probably did. She's old enough where she probably did pass from time to time. Now, interesting enough, if you ever watched Malcolm X, the movie Malcolm X?
Yeah, the one in the 90s.
When
Yeah, I
Denzel
watched.
Washington.
Mhm.
Yeah, Spike Lee.
Spike Lee.
If you knew, there was a part when he was talking about his mother, and his mother was very light-skinned or fair-skinned, and he says that his mother intentionally married a dark man, so their children, her offspring, would not be light-skinned or fair-skinned. Now, she chose not to pass. Politically, she chose not to pass. And I think that was the sentiment of many fair-skinned people at the time, because uh, when I look back at all the older fair-skinned people, they all married dark spouses. Dark. I mean, even darker than me, right? My great grandfather was dark. He was my complexion, maybe even a little bit darker, probably my complexion. All right. And interesting enough, some folks, some of their offspring could pass. Some of my aunts probably could pass. Some are light skinned and some are a little bit darker. So light skin and fair skin would be the prerequisite, and as you mentioned, the only prerequisite or requirement in passing. Well, you got to have that mental mindset too, right? That mental resolve. In this case, Malcolm X's mother didn't have that mental resolve, even though physically she could. Opportunities, I mean, opportunities within this context, obviously, you know what the word opportunities mean. But what do you think opportunities means within this context and within this entity?
Privilege.
From what perspective? Privilege from what perspective?
Privilege meaning doors open up. You have
Doors
more
open up.
access
So opportunities for who?
for those who pass.
There you go. Heritage. And again, I know you know what the word heritage means. But what do you think heritage means within this context? What do you think? Why do you think the word heritage comes up in this interview?
Well, heritage is basically like your past, your maybe like your family, your culture that you come from, your traditions. I think that if you have that passing mindset, as you said, then somehow heritage becomes excess baggage because you're basically you can't really bring it with you. You're bringing your family to the gate, but only you pass. They have to stay behind, and so you have to leave that behind also and accept something differently, because obviously your family and your traditions and culture, which make up who you are now have to be buried deep. And so I think that's what maybe that it'll come like that. It'll also can be seen from another perspective, right? It can be about also the cultural, let's say, the cultural attitude towards passing itself. How is it viewed? Like you said, that Malcolm X's grandmother was lighter skinned, but in her mind, in her tradition, her family, the way she saw it, this was unacceptable. Right? She had to make that political statement, you said. So I think there's heritage there also.
Right. Yeah. So we're gonna dig into that as the interview goes on, this idea of heritage, and I think you're there, but there's another aspect to this that's going to get mentioned. Prosperous, and again, I know you know what this word means. This kind of is not as important to the context. Well, it is. It's very important to the context. That's why I included it, but not as deep as these other words. But this idea of what happens when you pass and you become prosperous. What happens when you pass and you become prosperous? That's interesting, isn't it? So you get the opportunities, all the doors open, you get the privilege. Now what do you do? Knowing you are what you are.
And knowing that you got to where you are because you had to deny what you are.
Exactly.
That's the problem with it. Yeah.
So what happens, so that's when this idea of heritage kind of creeps up again, right? Declared. And I think that's an interesting word as it relates to this interview and to the topic, because there's a lot of declaring going on, isn't it?
As
Declaring that I'm white, declaring that I'm black.
but are you actually
Make-
declaring it, or are you just not putting, letting people um see you like that without you actually coming out and saying, no, that's not me, or that's not what I am?
Yeah, I think in many cases you have to declare it, especially when we're talking about uh when we're talking about the situations that could occur that you might get put in, or the questions that you might get asked. Right? The questions you might get asked. Why is your hair thicker than ours? You have to do some declaring, don't you?
Mhm.
And then we're going to see the other way where there's some declarations being made the other way. But I think a part of passing is making a declaration, that transition that I'm no longer what I am. I have to declare that. Because you got to remember, some of these people would marry white people, right? So there's a lot of declaration going on, right? Déclassé. Do you know what that means, déclassé?
No, I don't know. I've seen the word before, but the phrase, but I don't know what it means.
It just means out of style, out of touch, no longer in fashion, no longer recognized, past its prime.
Okay.
Okay. How do you think? What do you think? Why do you think this word creeps up into this interview?
Well, I imagine that from one generation to the next generation, there are these things, changes that occur. For example, in the 20s, when I look at African Americans in the 20s, I noticed like they have those things, what do they call it, speakeasies in their clubs, and they'd always grease their hair down. Like it would just be like almost straight when you look at it. And, of course, a lot of from the comedy, African Americans are great comedians, and they're selfless in the sense that they can just be so honest about things. And so, I remember them talking about how people would use hot oil and hot combs, right, to get the hair straight. And of course, I come from, I mean, in Sudan, just like anywhere else. This issue of having straight hair, or trying to get your hair straighter, or trying to put it into a ponytail. This is very common. Um, and I think the difference is that with this generation, or as we've progressed and understood that it's, the ramifications or what it means, or I think they it's for a party, they'll do it for one day, they'll do it for an occasion, something like that. It's like a white girl getting dreads, they'll do it like once or twice, but it's not going to be on for all the time. I use that example only because I noticed that actually Caucasians, white people, they also, they copy a lot of Black culture and a lot of not only Black but Asian, all these cultures, and we don't see that as being weird, or we don't see anything about it. But for our own people, when they do that, we're very critical. And again, I think we always take it a bit further than other. And of course, it goes also to the fact that where we come from, our social situation, and all that makes us more adamant, to prove our existence and our worth, and etc. So anyway, but in those days, they used to, yeah.
And let's be real, if you can't pass, you're going to be very critical of somebody who does that, right? Especially because you speak of speakeasy. I mean, even today, Black women still straighten their hair to the point where they wear wigs and
Right.
extensions
Weaves and
and
stuff. Yeah.
weaves and stuff to have their hair straight. And I think the only difference is they're not doing it to be white per se, because it's so ingrained into the culture
Right.
now to have straight hair,
Right.
which at its root, at its root, it's based on passing, and even those who could not pass at least wanted to have those qualities, because if my hair is straighter, even if I'm darker, my hair is straighter, I'm somehow better. You see,
They
at
call
least
them
my hair,
the,
at least my hair is not kinky, right?
but that of course goes back to what we call alamat al-jamal, which is the signs of beauty. All right.
Mhm.
There are certain things that just globally or on a very wide scale are considered beautiful things. It starts with basics. It could be the hair type. It could be the eyebrows. Women. It's a really in men we don't really talk about it too much, but I can see it in the female culture, and you can tell because of the way they do their mascara and the way they do all the eyelashes and the way they do. So all of these are like beauty tips or points of beauty that they try to accentuate. Having straight hair is considered more beautiful than having hair that is kinky or that is difficult to manage. That's something that's spans the globe. Now, of course,
And
beauty is in the eye of the beholder also. Yeah.
and it spans the globe because normally fashion and beauty are typical of political influence, right? So whoever your captor is, whoever's in charge, you want to. We all face that Stockholm syndrome, right? You want to look like those that are in charge and have power, so you can gain that power, whether it be political, intellectual, or internal confidence. So yeah, beauty is always a the standard of whoever is controlling the narrative and the message. That's what beauty is. So it's beauty is always a political and political social result or residue of those that are in power. Those who
And
control the message.
right, right. And we're a minority,
Right.
on this planet, we are a minority. And so our whatever uh the way we see beauty, for example, is a minority's view of how they see beauty. And then you have all the others, you know. All of Africa is a smaller India, that's all it is. They got China, they got all these places, they got the US, you got so our views are still, and add to that we have absolutely no reach. We have no reach outside of where we are. As a matter of fact, we're sponges. We keep absorbing.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Africa, in that Africa is the largest continent, has a lot of people, a lot of countries and cultures, and even still now in modern day Africa, one of the leading selling products are whitening creams and hair weaves and extensions.
Yeah.
So, um, even in 2022, in the backdrop of the influence of hip hop and social justice and all these other ideas and concepts, still, and it's not just Africa, by the way. It's you see it here in the Middle East, you see it in Saudi Arabia. Go into the beauty care products, and half of the products have labeled whitening,
Yeah.
to whiten your
Right.
whitening cream. So, and again, that's why my position is that beauty is a product of whatever the social or whoever's controlling the narrative. In this case, Hollywood controls the larger part of the narrative, in that it's very influential. Even though in Nigeria, and in Bollywood, I forgot what they called Nigerian Hollywood, and
Nollywood.
then Nollywood, is it Nollywood?
Nollywood. Yeah.
And then you have Bollywood. These
Bollywood.
are both of these, India and Nigeria, I think they produce way more movies than Hollywood ever does, but Hollywood controls the message, and
Right.
therefore the ideas of we don't see women trying to look Indian per se. And we definitely don't see women trying to look Nigerian. But we still have that political, social residue of people trying still to look Caucasian. And that's because ultimately we still are railing from the UK, the British Empire, controlling 2/3 of the world. We're in the midst of the influence of the United States of America, the commercial influence America has on the rest of the world. And this is a reality. So if that influence is that powerful throughout the world today, imagine in 1910 Georgia or North Carolina or Tennessee, New York, Boston. Imagine the influence that influence has on African Americans. All right, last one, integration. What, I know you know what integration is. What role do you think integration has on this as it relates to this interview?
I'm not sure. Maybe it has I don't know, after they've passed, do they need to integrate further, or is it the opposite? Or is it I'm not sure really with this one. Can't go anyway.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. But as you know, integration is when the integration laws. Let me leave it because again, it's not like I'm talking to a fourth grader here. So let me leave that. I think you'll see as we go into the interview the role that integration played. Now, here's some preview questions. Did I do this right? Yeah. Did I do this right? Yeah. I'm going to ask you these questions. You're going to predict the answers. Okay. First is, who is Pela Johnson? And does she say, and it should be why does she say, I'm not black? I'm not black. I won't be black.
Because she's denying, or forget denying, but she's in denial, but most of all, she's trying to get away from something.
Okay.
She's trying to get away from who she is.
So who is she? Who do you think she is?
She's the person who's passing, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Allison Hobbs says, I started to realize that writing this history of passing is really writing a history of blank. Can you fill in that blank? I started to realize that writing this history of passing is really writing a history of
Piola.
The history of Piola. Okay. Blank said, Ole Miss was fighting a battle they had no idea that they had lost years ago. Now, obviously, you won't know what the blank is, but how is this statement connected and critical to the topic? Ole Miss was fighting a battle that they had no idea they had lost, years ago.
Because this is all about identity. And at some point, this person, right, feels that the issue of identity and the crisis of identity is the issue of identity is a crisis. And so she's comparing it to a battle. And okay, so this could be Piola's mom, for example. Or it could be somebody related to Piola who's older who says, okay, we lost Piola and her sense of identity is lost and all that. It could be something like that. Or it could be a more socially protracted topic. It could be something about how this Ole Miss misses Mississippi, yeah. So
Yep.
Ole Miss was
Oh,
right. So Ole Miss, if I'm not
University.
mistaken, at a university, yeah.
Mhm.
So if this is the Ole Miss, meaning that university, so then now they're fighting a battle about their identity,
Okay.
who they are. Yeah.
All right. Next preview question. What was expected to happen after integration?
That color would have no bearing on any topic, or that it wouldn't matter.
Okay. And then the last deal. What did African Americans who passed really want?
They wanted to escape the reality of what it's like to be an African American.
Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to listen to we're going to listen to the interview. We're going to listen several times to answer each question. Okay. So once the answer to the first question has played, I'm gonna let it play for maybe a couple more seconds, then I'll stop it. Okay. And then you can write down your answer. All right. Hopefully, I didn't think about this. Hopefully you can hear the audio. I think you should be able to hear the audio.
The act of passing is a little understood.
Can you hear it?
Yeah, I can hear it.
All right, good.
The act of passing is a little understood part of our nation's troubled history with race. From the days of slavery to the civil rights movement and beyond, some lighter-skinned African Americans escaped the often brutal realities of racism by creating new lives as white people. Now, Stanford historian Allison Hobbs explores their stories in a new book titled A Chosen Exile, A History of Racial Passing in American Life. Karen Grigsby Bates of NPR's Code Switch team has this report.
Perhaps the most enduring image of passing came from the 1934 movie Imitation of Life. In it, a young light-skinned girl, Piola Johnson, yearns to escape the stigma of race, even if it means abandoning her family.
I'm not black. I'm not black. I won't be black.
When Piola grows up, she runs away from the Negro college she was attending to live like.
Right. All right. I'll give you a chance to write your answer.
Okay.
All right. I'm gonna play it from the beginning again, okay?
All right.
The act of passing is a little understood part of our nation's troubled history with race. From the days of slavery to the civil rights movement and beyond, some lighter-skinned African Americans escaped the often brutal realities of racism by creating new lives as white people. Now, Stanford historian Allison Hobbs explores their stories in a new book titled A Chosen Exile, A History of Racial Passing in American Life. Karen Grigsby Bates of NPR's Code Switch team has this report.
Perhaps the most enduring image of passing came from the 1934 movie Imitation of Life. In it, a young light-skinned girl, Piola Johnson, yearns to escape the stigma of race, even if it means abandoning her family.
I'm not black. I'm not black. I won't be black.
When Piola grows up, she runs away from the Negro college she was attending to live life in a new city as a white woman. She has a job that would have been closed to her if she'd acknowledged her colored blood. Her heartbroken mother dies soon after. Historian Allison Hobbs says too much of the story of passing is focused on what was gained, new jobs, new freedoms, rather than what was left behind.
I started to realize that writing this history of passing is really writing a history of loss.
So Hobbs devoted 10 years of research to this part of the story. We're in Hobbs's office at Stanford University, where the walls are hung.
All right.
Okay.
The
So
act
Viola
of
Johnson
passing
is
little understood part of our nation's troubled history with race. From the days of slavery to the civil rights movement and beyond, some lighter skinned African Americans escaped the often brutal realities of racism by creating new lives as white people. Now, Stanford historian Allison Hobbs explores their stories in a new book titled A Chosen Exile, A History of Racial Passing in American Life. Karen Grigsby Bates of NPR's Code Switch team has this report.
Perhaps the most enduring image of passing came from the 1934 movie Imitation of Life. In it, a young light-skinned girl, Viola Johnson, yearns to escape the stigma of race, even if it means abandoning her family.
I'm not black. I'm not black. I won't be black.
When Viola grows up, she runs away from the Negro college she was attending to live life in a new city as a white woman. She has a job that would have been closed to her if she'd acknowledged her colored blood. Her heartbroken mother dies soon after. Historian Allison Hobbs says too much of the story of passing is focused on what was gained, new jobs, new freedoms, rather than what was left behind.
I started to realize that writing this history of passing is really writing a history of loss.
So Hobbs devoted 10 years of research to this part of the story. We're in Hobbs's office at Stanford University, where the walls are hung with pictures of Black Americans throughout history. She's flipping through a huge notebook stuffed with stories of fair-skinned Black people who passed as white. But the true inspiration for Hobbs' book came from her own family's history. Several years ago, a favorite aunt told her about a distant, very fair cousin whose mother forced her to leave her hometown in the 1930s and move to Los Angeles to live as a white woman.
Her mother really felt that this was the very best thing that she could do for her daughter. She felt that this was a way of offering her daughter opportunities and a new life that she wouldn't be able to have if she lived as a Black woman on the south side of Chicago.
So the cousin moved to California, passed, married a white man, and raised children who knew nothing of their Black heritage. About a decade later, her phone rang. The woman's father was dying, and her mother wanted her to return home to see him one last time.
Our cousin says, I can't come home. I can't go back. I'm a white woman now, and there's just no turning back.
The cousin missed her father's funeral and never saw her mother or her siblings again. Hobbs was haunted by this story of gaining whiteness while losing family.
And it made me think about all of the families that likely have a story like this.
Her research found many. People like Elsie Roxborough from a distinguished Black Detroit family who left to live as white in New York, something noted in the local Black press. And Harry S. Murphy, who'd attended the University of Mississippi in 1945 for an entire year as a cadet in a military program because a commanding officer assumed Murphy was white.
In 1962, when James Meredith was integrating Ole Miss, Harry S. Murphy said that Ole Miss was fighting a battle that they had no idea that they had lost years ago.
There were people who passed for work and returned to their Black lives in their private hours, their employers none the wiser. And
All right, I'll let you answer
so the last one was Harry S. Murphy.
that. I'll let you answer that, but there's another part of the question.
Okay.
How is the statement connected to and critical to the topic? If you can, I'm gonna play it again so you can answer it for the next one.
Well, all of this is about she was giving an example of a white of a person who had passed as white and had joined the military, and nobody had assumed that that they were Black. And Hobbes is basically following the trail, the historical trail of families whose family members who had taken on this new identity, but she said it was a tragedy that they had left behind family. They had exchanged this new life for their families. But okay,
So,
I mean, to get to
the statement itself, Ole Miss was fighting a battle that they had no idea that they had lost years ago. How is that statement critical, connected and critical to the topic?
Well, I don't want to speculate, so let's just play it again. Play that part again. Let's see.
Okay.
Let's start with that last
The
part.
act of passing is a little understood part of our nation's troubled history with race. From the days of slavery to the civil rights movement and beyond, some lighter-skinned African Americans escaped the often brutal realities of racism by creating new lives as white people. Now, Stanford historian Allison Hobbs explores their stories in a new book titled A Chosen Exile, A History of Racial Passing in American Life. Karen Grigsby Bates of NPR's Code Switch team has this report.
Perhaps the most enduring image of passing came from the 1934 movie Imitation of Life. In it, a young light-skinned girl, Peola Johnson, yearns to escape the stigma of race, even if it means abandoning her family.
I'm not black. I'm not black. I won't be black.
When Peola grows up, she runs away from the Negro college she was attending to live life in a new city as a white woman. She has a job that would have been closed to her if she'd acknowledged her colored blood. Her heartbroken mother dies soon after. Historian Allison Hobbs says too much of the story of passing is focused on what was gained, new jobs, new freedoms, rather than what was left behind.
I started to realize that writing this history of passing is really writing a history of loss.
So Hobbs devoted 10 years of research to this part of the story. We're in Hobbs's office at Stanford University, where the walls are hung with pictures of Black Americans throughout history. She's flipping through a huge notebook stuffed with stories of fair-skinned Black people who passed as white. But the true inspiration for Hobbs' book came from her own family's history. Several years ago, a favorite aunt told her about a distant, very fair cousin whose mother forced her to leave her hometown in the 1930s and move to Los Angeles to live as a white woman.
Her mother really felt that this was the very best thing that she could do for her daughter. She felt that this was a way of offering her daughter opportunities and a new life that she wouldn't be able to have if she lived as a Black woman on the south side of Chicago.
So the cousin moved to California, passed, married a white man, and raised children who knew nothing of their Black heritage. About a decade later, her phone rang. The woman's father was dying, and her mother wanted her to return home to see him one last time.
Our cousin says, I can't come home. I can't go back. I'm a white woman now, and there's just no turning back.
The cousin missed her father's funeral and never saw her mother or her siblings again. Hobbs was haunted by this story of gaining whiteness while losing family.
And it made me think about all of the families that likely have a story like this.
Her research found many. People like Elsie Roxborough from a distinguished Black Detroit family who left to live as white in New York, something noted in the local Black press. And Harry S. Murphy, who'd attended the University of Mississippi in 1945 for an entire year as a cadet in a military program because a commanding officer assumed Murphy was white.
In 1962, when James Meredith was integrating Ole Miss, Harry S. Murphy said that Ole Miss was fighting a battle that they had no idea that they had lost years ago.
There were people who passed for work and returned to their Black lives in their private hours, their employers none the wiser, and others who left everyone and everything they knew forever. But some African Americans who passed reversed themselves later, like the Johnstons, a prosperous family in New Hampshire that after 10 years of living as white grew tired of the lie and publicly declared themselves Negro in 1949. Hobbs says the Johnstons became a national story.
This is after World War II, and this is a moment when there's a sense that perhaps integration is on the horizon. So a lot of the newspapers that covered this story were looking at the Johnstons as being kind of emblems of the integrationist era.
True integration wouldn't occur for decades. The civil rights movement removed de jure segregation that was often the catalyst for many people's decision to pass. Later, Black pride would make the practice déclassé. And the continuing evolution of multiculturalism in America would seem to make passing irrelevant.
I'm sure it still exists because certainly there are still
All right. So we're at what was expected to happen after integration?
What was expected to happen after integration? Well, it was expected that people would be treated the same and life would be great. You wouldn't be judged by your color.
All right, last question.
People who passed, what did they want? They wanted to, at the beginning, she said they wanted to get away from the harsh reality of what it was to be an African American.
With race. From the days of slavery to the civil rights movement and beyond, some lighter-skinned African Americans escaped the often brutal realities of racism by creating new lives as white people. Now, Stanford historian Allison Hobbs explores their stories in a new book titled A Chosen Exile, A History of Racial Passing in American Life. Karen Grigsby Bates of NPR's Code Switch team has this report.
Perhaps the most enduring image of passing came from the 1934 movie Imitation of Life. In it, a young light-skinned girl, Peola Johnson, yearns to escape the stigma of race, even if it means abandoning her family.
I'm not black. I'm not black. I won't be black.
When Peola grows up, she runs away from the Negro college she was attending to live life in a new city as a white woman. She has a job that would have been closed to her if she'd acknowledged her colored blood. Her heartbroken mother dies soon after. Historian Allison Hobbs says too much of the story of passing is focused on what was gained, new jobs, new freedoms, rather than what was left behind.
I started to realize that writing this history of passing is really writing a history of loss.
So Hobbs devoted 10 years of research to this part of the story. We're in Hobbs's office at Stanford University, where the walls are hung with pictures of Black Americans throughout history. She's flipping through a huge notebook stuffed with stories of fair-skinned Black people who passed as white. But the true inspiration for Hobbs' book came from her own family's history. Several years ago, a favorite aunt told her about a distant, very fair cousin whose mother forced her to leave her hometown in the 1930s and move to Los Angeles to live as a white woman.
Her mother really felt that this was the very best thing that she could do for her daughter. She felt that this was a way of offering her daughter opportunities and a new life that she wouldn't be able to have if she lived as a Black woman on the south side of Chicago.
So the cousin moved to California, passed, married a white man, and raised children who knew nothing of their Black heritage. About a decade later, her phone rang. The woman's father was dying, and her mother wanted her to return home to see him one last time.
Our cousin says, I can't come home. I can't go back. I'm a white woman now, and there's just no turning back.
The cousin missed her father's funeral and never saw her mother or her siblings again. Hobbs was haunted by this story of gaining whiteness while losing family.
And it made me think about all of the families that likely have a story like this.
Her research found many. People like Elsie Roxborough from a distinguished Black Detroit family who left to live as white in New York, something noted in the local Black press. And Harry S. Murphy, who'd attended the University of Mississippi in 1945 for an entire year as a cadet in a military program because a commanding officer assumed Murphy was white.
In 1962, when James Meredith was integrating Ole Miss, Harry S. Murphy said that Ole Miss was fighting a battle that they had no idea that they had lost years ago.
There were people who passed for work and returned to their Black lives in their private hours, their employers none the wiser, and others who left everyone and everything they knew forever. But some African Americans who passed reversed themselves later, like the Johnstons, a prosperous family in New Hampshire that after 10 years of living as white, grew tired of the lie and publicly declared themselves Negro in 1949. Hobbs says the Johnstons became a national story.
This is after World War II, and this is a moment when there's a sense that perhaps integration is on the horizon. So a lot of the newspapers that covered this story were looking at the Johnstons as being kind of emblems of the integrationist era.
True integration wouldn't occur for decades. The civil rights movement removed de jure segregation that was often the catalyst for many people's decision to pass. Later, Black pride would make the practice déclassé. And the continuing evolution of multiculturalism in America would seem to make passing irrelevant.
I'm sure it still exists because certainly there are still benefits that accrue to being white, but I think that it's important to kind of locate the practice of passing within the particular political and economic and social conditions of the time period.
Hobbs hopes her book helps people understand that most Black people who passed during this painful period didn't want to be white. They just wanted to be free. Karen Grigsby Bates, NPR News.
Right. All right, so let's just quickly go over your answers. I should have, shame on me, I should have wrote your predictions versus what actually happened. But I think you were spot on mostly everything. So who is Paola Johnson? And why does she say, I'm not black, I won't be black?
Viola Johnson is she's in a movie, a 1934 movie character. And she's a child. And she basically doesn't, she feels she doesn't want to have to be treated as a black person and only have the opportunities of a black person. And she's adamant because apparently she can pass. And as she gets older, she then goes on to get her own job and a job for a white person, and she lives her life as a white lady and gets married and all that.
Yeah, there's an interesting there's another one, probably the best movie Halle Berry ever played in, where she actually had to act, was called Queen. Very good movie. If you ever get a chance, it's a mini series, I believe. Queen, very good. She actually showed that she can actually act. And it's the same deal. She but this takes place in post the Confederates lose, and the slave owner, he's died. So the wife of the slave owner tells Queen Halle Berry, you got to go. But the husband was actually Queen's father. He had sex with one of the slaves, and back then, the slave children of the slave master would actually work in the house, and the wife was like, you gotta go, we can't afford you anymore. And she goes off on a journey to try to figure out her life as this person who looked white, and tried to deny her African heritage, and comes to a resolution. It almost fits the same as this interview. It's kind of the same line as this interview, because she comes up to she makes the declaration towards the end of the movie. Number 3, Blank said Ole Miss was fighting a battle that they had no idea. Oh, I'm sorry. Allison Hobbs says, I started to realize that writing this history of passing is really writing a history of
loss.
And you basically already said that. I think you said justice or something like this before. Blank said Ole Miss was fighting a battle they had no idea that they had lost years ago.
That's Harry Murphy.
And
he's
why was that?
He's talking about George Meredith, who was trying to integrate Ole Miss. And so basically what Murphy's saying is that integration is impossible.
No, he's not saying that.
He's not saying
that. I think you missed it. Basically, so Meredith that's the person that the news and it's in the history books as integrating Ole Miss. However, what the interviewee, the person being interviewed, was saying, I think Allison Hobbs, she's saying that there's this guy before Meredith even integrated Ole Miss that had already integrated Ole Miss, and Ole Miss didn't even know he was black, right?
Right. Right.
So she was making the point that Ole Miss was already integrated because they had these black people passing as white in the university already. So that's
Okay.
what that meant. That's
All
what
right.
that meant. Which I think is pretty funny. What was expected to happen after integration? This is kind of not of a this. I kind of poorly worded this question when I look back at it. I should have. I should have written what was expected. I should have written what was expected to happen after World War II. That should be the question, not after integration, but after World War II. And the answer would have been integration.
Okay.
Fully worded question. But I kept it because there was an expectation after integration, and you kind of hit on it, that everything would be okay. And that, after integration, everything would be fine and Black people would get all their rights. And we know that it didn't go down like that. But the question should have been what was expected to happen after World War II. All right. And then the last one, what did African Americans who passed really want?
That was to escape the realities of the African American,
And then
the difficult situation that they live in. Yeah.
What's the word that the author used? F word.
The freedom.
Freedom. Freedom. Right. What they really wanted was freedom. All right. So if I do this in the future, I'll put World War II. Better question. All right. And then the last activity for our listening drill here is taking the words from Quicks. Let me just copy and paste the words from Quicks real quick. All right. So we got our Quicks here. Let me see. I don't know if you can see the changes. Let me stop. You probably can't see the changes. So I get 3 out of that. There you go. All right. All right. You see the chat made it so you can see the words now.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. So let me do one more thing. Hold on a second so you can see the whole screen. All right, let's see how good your memory is. The act of blank is a little understood part of our nation's troubled history
The act
with
of passing.
rape. All right. Perhaps the most enduring image of passing came from the 1934 movie Blank of Life.
Imitation of life.
Good. In it, a young
Light-skinned
blank
girl.
There you go. She's flipping through a huge notebook stuffed with stories of blank Black people who passed as white.
You can only use it once, so that'd be fair-skinned Black people who pass as white.
Very good. She felt that
Or vice
this was
versa, by the way. Yeah.
or vice versa, but in the actual transcript is light skin and fair skin. All right.
Okay.
But it could be vice versa. You're right. She flipped. She felt that this was a way of offering her daughter blank in a new life that she wouldn't be able to have if she lived as a Black woman on the South
Opportunities.
Side. Offer her daughter. Yeah, there you go. So the cousin moved to California, passed, married a white man, and raised children who knew nothing of their Black.
Heritage.
There you go. But some African Americans who passed reversed themselves later, like the Johnstons, a blank family in New Hampshire that after 10 years of living as a white, grew tired of the lie and publicly blanked
Declared
themselves
themselves Negro in 1949 and a prosperous family.
There you go. This after World War II, in this moment when there's a sense that perhaps blank is on the horizon.
Integration.
Yep. Later, Black pride would make the practice.
Declass.
There you go. All right. That's our listening activity.
All right.
All right. So let's just talk about what I did here. Now, obviously, let's see, let's go back. Bring this back up. Now, obviously, this is way more intellectual because obviously we're very educated, right? So this conversation is very intellectual. However, I proved that we can do this we can make this activity a higher ordered activity, right? So you can do this with C1s and C2s who are doing like English for academic purposes or whatever. All right. Or you can bring it down. So you can level this listening activity. It doesn't have to be B1, B2. It doesn't have to be low level. So the first thing I did was what?
Set the context, the warmer.
All right. So warmer. And I did that by asking you relatively easy question. For you, might have been harder for someone else. So I would have, if this was a low level, I would have asked a more simpler question like, have you ever pretend to be someone else, right? Is it good to pretend to be something that you're not? Maybe something like this, right? And then I went in and from the warmer, I asked you a question that was going to do what?
And with the context.
Right. And basically what we do here is you always, before you play any type of listening activity, you tell the reader or you tell the students exactly what they're going to hear. You're going to hear, well, we're going to listen to an interview about African-American passing. We're going to listen to a story about, the history of Sudan, right? So you're going to tell the reader or the listener or the students exactly what they're going to listen to, exactly. And you can set that up also by asking them a question like, the title of this story is A Chosen Exile. What do you think the story is going to be about? Right. So you give them the title. In this case, this didn't really have a title, so I used the title that they mentioned in the interview, which I thought was appropriate. So I always start with the title, and then after either or, I could say we're going to read it. We're going to listen to a story about African American passing. This interview or this story is called A Chosen Exile. What do you think that means? Or whatever the title is. So it gives them, because what I want them to do is predict. I want the students to predict. And then I took it a step further with you and asked you what type of ideas and topics, because I knew you're going to be, I could take it a step further with you. After that, I did what? I went over what?
Keywords and context.
I went over the keywords and context. So these are all words that I felt like were important to build context for what was going to be listened to. Okay. And then so as I went through each word, again, for you, we had a much more intellectual conversation. It went long. If you lowest level students, it's not going to go as long as they went with us, right? But I asked, why do you, this word, maybe the word is not used and it is not used the way they normally would use the word. Maybe we're looking at a tertiary definition of the word. So we go into not only the definition of the word, but how the word connects with the story or the topic, right? Because we're not just randomly picking words, we're picking words that will help build understanding and help build context. That's the key, okay? And then from there, what did I do? I front-loaded the questions, right? I front-loaded the questions, had you predict the answers to the questions, right? So I front-loaded the questions, all right? And again, depending on how much time you have, to be honest with you, I wasn't expecting us to go as long on the quicks, which was fine because we had a good little conversation, which that's what you want. So maybe one of the things I could have done was take the 5 questions and narrow them down to 3 because the quicks were so long. I decided not to do that, but that's something, based on time, right? Yeah. And then we listened to the prompt or the audio. And what did I do for each question?
For each question, you stopped midway through, like a third of the way, and then midway, and you asked 1 question or 2 questions to answer. Usually, right when the answer appeared, then you would stop and say, "Okay, what's the answer here?"
So
And
basically,
but you would go back to the beginning. You'd stop
yeah,
like a third and start from the beginning.
Right, for you, which probably was a little bit painful for you, but for students, not. For somebody who doesn't know English, they need
Right.
that. They want that. Trust me. I do it all the time with the students at the university. They love it when I start back at the beginning, because it's painful for you, but it's not painful for them. And that's an ongoing theme. Even when we talk about the micro teaching, teacher, student, it's going to be painful for you, but it's not painful for them. And I can show you evidence, right? They want to hear that same prompt 100 times if they can. It might be painful. So the only person who's going to get bored of the repetition is you, not the learners. Okay? They're not going to get bored of it. And that's a key point, because I always hear people say, "Why you keep on playing, or you keep doing the same things over and over again?" Yes, because you know English, but for somebody who doesn't know, that they love that repetition, they want that repetition. So we end up playing it. Right, go ahead. We end up playing it 5 times, right? Because there was 5 questions.
Yeah.
Right. And I started right from the beginning. All right. Now, technically, I could have made it more painful and played it all the way through for each one, because that's technically what you're supposed to do, is play it all the way through for each question and then start from the beginning. But I didn't want to kill you that bad. Right?
Okay.
But
it was nice. It was nice listening to it. I'm just saying that I noticed it. I wanted to show you that I noticed you could have gone, to a minute ahead and then played again, but you went all the way to the beginning. So I knew that had to do with like a technique, right? It wasn't like.
Yeah,
I understood that.
So, and again, you may get bored of listening to the prompt, but they won't.
Just you. Yeah.
They will not, especially because for these questions, easy for you, but a simple question for you is very difficult for them. Especially to fill in the blank, and then especially these open-ended questions, like what was expected to happen, or they need a lot of time. So play it straight through so they can process that many times.
Why did you write the questions twice?
Because just to show you that these things happen twice. So this is the front loading, because we actually did it 3 times, right? We front loaded, You did it in the middle, and then we came back again at the end and did what? Got
We
your
reviewed
answers,
it. Mhm.
right? Got your answers for the students, because I need to know whether who got the answers right, who got them wrong, whether I need to do this activity again, who I need to give extra attention to, right? And you'll find that out, because believe it or not, after playing it that many times, there are going to be still some students, especially with the open-ended questions, who didn't get it, right? And even you'd be surprised, even the fill in the blanks that they might not get. All right, and then at the end, once we did that, if we have time, hopefully we do, then we do an activity to just basically work on to make sure they heard everything, that see how much they actually obtained from the prompt. Now, again, these were the actual phrases used in the prompt. So this was the actual phrases used in the prompt with the actual quicks. So now we reinforce the idea or meaning of the audio, and also the quicks. So it becomes not only now it's not just a listening activity, it also becomes a vocabulary activity. It's also a grammar activity. It's also a history activity. So you got all these things all in one, right? And you can make a game out of this one, right? You can do tic-tac-toe, right? So for everyone to get right, so you can break them up into teams, right? And one's X, one team's X, the other team's O, and they can try to get tic-tac-toe that way, right? Now, if you notice, with the exception of 8 and 9, because I just for some apparent reason, I don't know why, I put them right in order, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Everything is right in order based on the prompt. So again, this is one of those things that I don't want the students to feel defeated, even if they see, oh, they just right in order. That's fine. I don't care, because I want to touch that person who didn't understand and give them a victory at the end, right? Okay. That's the essence of teaching listening.
Okay.
From start to beginning. As you can see, that requires a lot of time, requires a lot of planning.
Mhm.
Because even if you use the same, like I've used this one a million times in many different sessions, right? And normally I have Arabs who have no idea what I mean by passing. And this is a foreign concept, right?
Right.
Even though they pass all the time, right? You have people passing at Saudi. People pass at Saudi, right? All the time. But
I didn't know passing was a thing. I mean, when I came, when it started, I asked you, what is passing? I didn't understand, but the concept, I understand the concept of trying to be something you're not. I understand that, but I didn't understand that this was actually something that people wrote about and were, what was happening, and it was
it
a
happens
fad,
in
or it
every
was something that happened. Yeah.
it happens in every culture, actually. Not just every. I mean, like I said, I see people passing at Saudi all the time. They're Yemeni or they're Egyptian, and they pass at Saudi.
Right.
So it happens in every culture. Yep. So this is teaching listening.
Okay. Wonderful.
The key here is, the point I wanted to make was, although I've done this prompt for years, literally for years, each time I have to change it. Like I had to create this just for you, because some of this would have been too hard. The way I've done it would have been too hard this would have been too hard for other people, right? Even teachers, because they might not be as open-minded or intellectual or yada, yada, yada. So the key I'm trying to make here is, or the point I'm trying to make here is, if you have a prompt that you like I love this prompt, you still have to cater it to each one of your groups. So don't just pull it out and say, oh, I'm going to do this one, because it might not work with that group. You're going to have to customize it customize the questions and the quicks for that group.
Oh,
You know,
very interesting, actually.
slower group, maybe not as much quicks, right? If you don't have as much time, just make everything smaller,
Mhm.
right? You know, maybe you only have 4 quicks or 2 quicks. Let's you know, maybe you only have 2 questions. You know, maybe the prompt for a group of students that maybe your B1s and B2s. This was a 5-minute prompt, 5 minutes. For my B1s and B2s, I'm only going to go maybe a minute and a half, 2 minutes.
Okay.
You see,
Okay.
because
So
5
you need to
minutes would be.
customize it.
You need to customize it, right? And again, the B1, B2, I wouldn't do passing with B1, B2, right? That's just too.
Yeah,
I'll do something
gotcha.
more appropriate. So in your center, I would have at least one audio for your B1s, one
Right.
audio for your B2s, one audio for your A1s, your A2s, your B1s, your B2s, and your C1s. I would have one audio that you're comfortable with and that you can customize, and then make sure you have the transcript for that audio.
Okay.
So pull the transcript. The good thing about it is like places like NPR, there's a lot of places where you can pull the transcript for interviews in there, and then download the audios. Because having the transcripts will allow you to copy and paste and makes life less painful for you. And I would just have those core audios, put them on a USB and several USBs, put them in your email, put them on your computer, everywhere that you can just pull out, you know, and that you have to help students with, you know.
All
And
right.
it depends on how many days of listening you're going to do in your program. You know, the more days of listening you're going to do, the more audios you need. And then you would just have these audio packets that's set up the same way, just like I did it. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, that was a lot.
Okay.
That was a lot.
Yeah, it was quite fun actually. I haven't heard this actually. Or I mean, not in a setting, you know, like yeah, sure, the media, you know, there's always these programs talking about these things and talking about race and you know, but this passing was something new for me. I never really and now that you mention it, you're right. You know, people do pass, you know, in their own ways. I was in you know, you talk about Saudi Arabia, I'll tell you about Filipinos will pass as Chinese, you know, they'll pass as
Yeah,
Japanese, you know, Koreans
yes.
pass as Japanese, you know?
Yeah.
And it's all meant to somehow elevate your social stature or, you know, give you that
Mhm.
thing
There-
that
There's another old movie called He's a Card. He's a
He's a card.
card. And that's an expression, that's an old-timey expression, he's a card. And it means he fits into a situation well. He fits into a situation well. And it's about this poor white guy who elevates himself into society, into, you know, and he gets exposed, you know, at a certain point, and he has to deal with that, being exposed and not being someone who he really is. Heath Ledger did a movie about passing, which was really good. It was kind of a comedy, called what was it? First Night. What was that movie called? It's a really
First
funny
Night
movie.
was Martin Lawrence.
That's Martin Lawrence.
Yeah.
Let me see. Heath
Soul Man.
Ledger.
There was Soul Man, if you remember that one. That was in the 80s or something like that, where that guy tries to get into college, but he has to be a minority, so he basically
Oh, that's
you
not
know,
Chevy Chase. Not Chevy Chase, but Dan Aykroyd.
was it
Dan
Dan
Aykroyd.
Aykroyd? Okay.
Yeah, A Knight's Tale. A
A
Knight's
Knight's
Tale. which is from Geoffrey Chaucer's A Knight's Tale. So it's like a ode to
Wow.
Geoffrey Chaucer. Yeah, so there's a lot of passing is something that's relevant. Obviously, Hollywood makes a lot of movies about passing. Very dear to African Americans because it's so close to our to African Americans. It's so relevant to us because even now, people still, even African Americans, still pass to this day. You know, and now passing is almost like, are you selling out? No, are you
Yeah.
selling out?
Yeah.
You're a sellout. You know. So, oh, you don't know us anymore. You're selling out. So it's and that, you know, and they lightly mention it in the interview of concerning the juxtaposition between passing and the Black Power movement. Because out of the Black Power movement came, oh, you selling out. Oh, you acting white. Oh, you sound white. You know, why you sound white? Why you acting white? You know, and it came out of, because before then, like you said before, and Malcolm X talked about in the movie, there was a lot of self-degradation going on because people we call it conking their hair. You know, you trying to get that straight hair. In fact, that was a major point in the Malcolm X movie. You remember when he gets arrested, yeah, you know, he has the conch in his hair. He goes into the toilet to get the conch out of his hair. The police grab him. So it's so passing is a major part of many people's history, and it's quite interesting how that it is something that occurs in all cultures. All right, so when's the next time we're meeting?
Well, see, today is the 9th. I'm doing well these days. I have time. When do you want to meet?
The next session will be Sunday then.
Sunday. Okay.
All right.
Sunday the 13th.
Yep. Is that the 13th?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. It's Wednesday already.
Today is Wednesday, so okay. How about
right.
Sunday? Okay, Sunday 13th. We're good.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Well,
All right.
bye for now.
Oh yeah, I wanted to. I forgot before you go.
Yeah.
I uploaded a paper I had written some time ago. It's a medical paper, very boring policy sort of thing, and I wrote an introduction there, and I explained why I thought, you know, if you have time, it's like 5 pages, 4 pages. If you have time to go through it, because we were talking about the active voice and passive voice, and we were talking about in the previous lesson. And some of the feedback I had gotten about that, it pertains to that, the use of active voice and passive voice and all that. So I thought, you know what, why don't I let you, you know, why don't you read it and then just have a look at it and tell me, well, yeah.
Send it to me and then we'll talk about it. You need it right away or?
It's on the classroom dashboard. I put it up last week.
Okay. All right.
Right.
I'll
Yeah.
take-
No, I don't need it right away. Take your time. Because you told me you had time, so I was like, great, this would be something.
No, I have time now. So
Okay.
I'll take a look at it and then
All right.
give the feedback.
Okay, great, excellent, wonderful. Okay,
All right.
thank you very
We'll
much.
see you-
Okay, Ray.